Chapter 2. Walking with a crowd for calm 360, Finn glanced around at his group of friends as they made their way across campus. Of the 12 of them, Finn stood with Arden, Avery, Skylar, and Reese at the back. Just ahead of them, Elaine linked her arm through Ender's, her boisterous curls bouncing around her shoulders. He whispered something in her ear, and she burst into giggles. Was Ender her date? He smirked, nearly rolling his eyes, while Avery droned on about some game. As Bryant Hall peeked above the hill, a bright red flash stained his thoughts, the phantom spray of an ocean breeze in his nose, and when he blinked, all he saw was vibrant crimson hair dancing like a flame on the sea. The memory took his vision. Instead of seeing the campus, he remembered her intense stare boring into the horizon. The set of her shoulders, her foot plunged into the icy water. All of it. When he'd caught sight of her, a shiver had run over his skin, but it hadn't been October's chill. His legs just pulled him to her. Once he'd gotten closer, once her gaze tipped up to meet him, it was her muted green eyes. They threw him back. The pictures of his family on vacations, they popped into his head. The look in his eyes then. The look in her eyes at that moment. Hers shined with red rims, but her face was smooth, impassive. He shook his head, bringing Bryant Hall's entrance into view. As they all entered the hall, he watched Mara thread her hand with Vera's as the puppy dog trio circled around her. Stifling a snicker, he watched the two girls lead their large group down the aisle toward their usual middle-row seats. As he passed the back seats of the lecture hall, a striking shade of instantly recognizable red caught in the corner of his eye. He double-taked, his head flinging back. That girl, it's that girl. He stepped back, intent on getting to her, but Arden's grunt at the sudden stop and the professor's voice starting class acted like walls, pushing him further into the row instead. But he hesitated at the seat left open for him. Glancing back, he caught sight of her pulling something out of her bag. It was an actual notebook, and she started writing notes. Amid a sea of laptops, she stood out with her longhand notes. He stifled a laugh, but with a confused look from Asher sitting on his other side, Finn sat down and faced forward. Digging into his backpack, he pulled out his own tablet, thinking of the girl's tightly tied back bun. It coiled her hair into little more than an overlooked period at the end of a sentence. Even her chosen seat at the back of the hall, in one of the end seats of a crowded row, did everything it could to hide her among everyone else. But he could never overlook her now.
Brynn. Brynn shoved her notebook into her messenger bag, eager to leave the lecture hall. She saw the guy from before, from that embarrassing day. Throughout class, he'd been throwing glances at the back row like an aggressive pitcher. While she'd kept her eyes firmly on her pencil and her ears focused on the professor's voice, she only wanted out now. But the person sitting in the very last seat moved like a snail as they packed away a laptop, a pair of glasses, scattered snacks. Brynn resisted the urge to tap her foot as she waited. Once the row blocker's bag was finally packed, he stood with all the urgency of a lazy afternoon. "Hey." The voice was more familiar than it should have been, even though it was a little out of breath. "Hi," she said, as the row blocker finally left, meandering toward the heavy doors. "Small world," he said. "I didn't realize that we had the same class, or even that we went to the same college." Her gaze drifted to his face. His eyes crinkled with an easy smile. She blinked, and a flash like a movie played in her head. The ocean wind flung curls across her face, but through the strands, she saw his back turned to her, blocking the street. The flash passed in a second, but her chest sunk with more memories of that day like stones, threatening to ground her underwater. "Yeah," she said, cursing the heat she felt in her cheeks. "Some of us were just heading to Benzo's. The bar? Would you want to come?" "Why?" Her eyes flitted away, chaos rattling its way through her body. She held her hands tightly together. It kept them from shaking as she focused on a point behind his right shoulder. Actually, I have work. She choked the words out, wincing at how strangled they sounded. But, thanks, I guess. Oh, he said. That's too bad. But he didn't leave. He didn't even move. What does he want? Rotted out taunts peeked out from a dark hole in her chest. Kids from classes who'd teased her after her dad quickly married her already pregnant stepmom. Her eyes slid to the guys before flying away again. But at that moment, their eyes met. She didn't see any familiar red flags. Are you feeling any better? She swallowed another stone, but it felt less weighted now. Please just forget that day, she said. Thank you, really. But please, just forget all about it.
Finn. Finn stared at her tightly wound bun as she moved around him and hurried through the lecture hall's doors. His foot moved after her, words rising in his throat, but they died on his tongue. Finn, Arden called. His head whipped around to find the group making their way up the aisle. Mara, Vera, and the trio led the way again, but they were all huddled in their own conversations. The rest of his group followed behind in their own loose circle, but Arden and Skylar, their hands clasped together, were still in the row of seats. "What's up with you, man?" Arden asked once they caught up to him. Skylar glanced at Finn from Arden's other side as they left the building, blending into the mess of people who also just left their 6 o'clock classes. "Who was that girl?" she asked. Finn opened his mouth to answer, but realized when nothing came out that he didn't really know anything about her. "I don't know her name," he said instead. "I just saw her at the beach the other day." "Never seen you go out of your way like that," Arden said. "Yeah," Skylar echoed. "Don't you usually just let them come to you?" Finn's eyes creased. "I wasn't thinking that," Finn said. The responding silence drew his eyes to the couple. They were staring at him, brows raised in identical expressions. "You two are starting to look alike," Finn said, remembering when the two got together their senior year of high school. "Shut up," Skylar said, scoffing. Finn made a show of contorting his face in faux agony. "Oh, please," Skylar said, scowling at him. "Anyway, what were you two even talking about?" Finn felt a groan in the back of his throat. "I just asked her to come to the bar with us," Finn said, as they turned a corner that clearly marked the change from the university-owned area to the local one. "She turned you down," Skylar said, a little too much smugness in her voice. "Dude," Arden said, lowering his voice, "you really not trying to fuck her?" A bare silhouette with wild, flowing hair filled his head. "She said she had work," Finn said, the mental image lingering. Skylar chuckled. "What are you three talking about?" Reese asked, slowing to join them. "Finn's hung up on a girl," Skylar said. Finn rolled his eyes and smirked. "As if," Finn said, shaking his head. "That girl with the red hair?" Reese asked. "Yeah," Arden said. "He invited her to the bar. She turned him down, though." Reese said, her eyes meandering away. "I've definitely seen her somewhere." Finn's ears perked. He glanced at Reese. "Right," she said, brightening. "I've seen her at that bar on 8th Street. Finn's chest lurched. "The stray dog?" Arden asked. "It's been a while since we've been there." "I was there last week," Reese said, "and I definitely remember her now. She made one hell of a cocktail."
Brynn. Brynn stood at the counter behind the bar of her second job. She poured scotch over a single large ice cube for a regular seated 3 stools down. She slid the drink to the guy, and he passed her a $5 tip. "Thanks," she said, pulling the bill quickly from the bar top and slipping it into her apron. Brynn's lips twitched as she whirled around to tidy up her corner of the bar. Matheson was manning the other end, but it was a slow night, so she was glad that Regular had sat on her side. She needed the extra tips after getting the birthday presents for the twins. But with nothing else to do now, she pulled the rag from her apron and started wiping down the counter's sticky surface. As she did, she surveyed the rest of the bar. A few people loitered near the tables. huddled around the TVs playing a local team's away game. But all the people over there had already ordered 2 or 3 drinks. By her estimation, they'd be on their way out soon, especially since the game was close to its end. Her eyes wandered, looking around the open area that was randomly covered in fake Halloween-themed spiderwebs to the deserted pool tables and dartboards across the room. She sighed. She peeked inside the pocket of her apron where she kept her tips. Counting for the 5th time this shift, the lack of bills hollowed out her throat. When the main door squeaked open, it drew her gaze. With a sharp intake of air, she examined the large group as they poured in. She recognized a few of them from shared classes. When the last one slipped through the door, she blanched. The guy from the beach. The scent of brine stung her nose as a sharp breath fought its way down her throat. Her eyes dropped to the rag in her hands. Why is he here? A couple of the others were familiar to her from coming around on their own, but this whole group from her calm lecture. She'd partially chosen this bar because it was the closest she could get to the school and walking distance from her apartment without it being a strictly college student clientele. She sighed. Brynn. Matheson's voice pulled her out of her head. She said, looking to him. He cocked an eyebrow. You have a customer, he said, and the annoyance in his tone prickled like needles in her chest. She feigned an apologetic smile. Thanks, she said, ignoring his condescension as she spun back around her area of the bar. When her gaze landed on the customer, it took every bit of self-control she had to not stop dead when their eyes met. Can I see your ID? She asked, the habitual words falling off her tongue in the same way she'd said it every time a new face dropped in on one of the opposite bar stools. The guy from the beach grinned, and she was positive that sly smile had charmed and broken many hearts before. Sure, he said, reaching for his back pocket. Here. Flipping the license around, she noted the year as her own birth year, the month and day making him almost 22 years old and only a month younger than her. And his name, Finn Roland Whitaker. What a pretentious name. She swallowed the chuckle that tickled the back of her throat, threatening to come out. So, what can I get you? She asked, and she focused her gaze right at the bridge of his nose. An old trick of hers to avoid eye contact. A round of tequila shots for my friends over there, he said, as he set his wallet on the bar top. But a whiskey sour for me first. Got it, Brynn said, pulling the bourbon from the bottom shelf along with a fresh lemon and the manual juicer. Your hair's down again. She could barely hear him over the din as she set the ingredients on the counter. Her hand flew to her maple red curls, bouncing around her shoulders. Yeah, she said. I only wear it like this 'cause I get extra tips, but she didn't dare say that aloud. It gets in the way at school. Makes sense, he said. And I don't like that it stands out. Why not? Did I say that out loud? She whirled around to the bar's mini fridge, nestled just under the shelves of alcohol. Kneeling down, she let her hair fall around her scorching face as she pulled out an egg. Swallowing hard and willing the burning blood under her cheeks to go away, she took her time turning around before adding it to the other ingredients on the counter. You don't like your hair standing out? Finn asked. She peeked up at him as memories of stabbing comments about her hair swirled around in her head, from strangers, friends, and her. Not really, she said, as she cracked the shell, sifting the egg whites between them so that it landed in the cocktail shaker. When people describe it as messy, unmanageable, or you can't miss my stepdaughter. She's got that unmanageable ginger hair. Well, it just gets tiresome. Remembering hurt like a rabid animal biting at her every thought. Someone's really said that to you? He asked, and the undercurrent in his voice captured her attention. The look in his eyes matched that vicarious chagrin. Yeah, she said, her eyes stinging. My stepmom. His gaze shifted, softening, and that released the hold they had on her. She blinked to clear whatever was choking her throat and eyes before combining the remaining ingredients. Maybe it's wrong to say this, Finn said as she shook the cocktail together. But I think your hair's striking. It's wild, but that's what makes it cool. I don't think that's a bad thing. Pursing her lips, she added ice to the shaker and focused on counting down the time she had left to mix the ingredients together.
Finn's lips twitched as she poured his whiskey sour into a glass. Here, she said when she set the drink down in front of him. I'll get those shots ready now. No response, huh? Bringing the glass to his mouth, he took a sip, and it was better than any whiskey sour he'd had at the other bars around. It's good, he said, pulling out a $20 tip and setting it down on the counter. When she saw it, her eyes widened. They narrowed again in an instant, and then she grabbed the bill, tucking it into her apron. Thanks, she said. His gaze wandered and caught sight of the name tag pinned to her plain black shirt. Brynn, that's a pretty name, rhymes with mine. So, she said as she started gathering glasses and ingredients for the shots. What about you, huh? He felt his brows tense, pulling together. What about me? You got me to say something personal, and I don't think I should be the only one. Her eyes were homed in on adding tequila to the shot glasses, but even in the low light of the bar, he could see crimson in her fair cheeks, like the wine stains he'd seen on his mother's cocktail dresses after a night out. Like what? He didn't want to make it easy when she was finally talking to him. With a small but aggressive exhale, she shot him a miffed look. Bringing the whiskey sour to his lips again, he tried to hide the amusement by taking a sip. Well, she said, her attention returning to the drinks. Why'd you talk to me that day at the beach? Why? Muted green eyes peered at him in his head. I don't know. It was something about how you looked, he said. It reminded me of... The thoughts burrowed out of his mind. Her gaze lifted, their eyes meeting, and he drifted back to that day. The way you looked, it reminded me of things I'd seen in old pictures with my family. Of yourself? She asked as she cut a lime into wedges. Yeah, he said, shifting in his seat as he took another sip from the glass. I guess. So, your relationship with your parents isn't good? His eyes snapped to her. What? The knife in her hand hovered over the next lime on her cutting board. Sorry, she said, hanging her head. Did I get it wrong? No, he said. You're not wrong, but how did you... Because that's how it is with my parents, she said, her voice so low he nearly didn't hear her. And that's what I was thinking about when you saw me. Oh, he said. I guess that makes us even now, she said, while arranging the shots on a tray. These are ready, she said, and she came around to the other side of the bar, balancing the tray on one hand. Oh, and I need a card for the tab. He pulled a card out of his wallet, but he was in a daze. Before he realized it, the shots were down on the table by his friends, and she'd gone back to the bar. Tucking the card somewhere under the counter, where he assumed they kept all the cards, she knelt down below the bar top until he could only see the crown of her burning red hair. Boo! Hot breath tickled his ear, sending shivers down his arms. He grinned, tearing his gaze from Brynn to Mara. She smiled like the businessmen and women his parents had often brought around. Is she really that interesting? Mara asked, cocking a brow as she tipped her head toward the bar. Finn smirked, letting out a sneer. "Where's Vera?" he asked. She scoffed, tipping her head toward the furthest pool table where Vera leaned over with a pool stick, her bra peeking out from under the shirt. Cleavage spilled out. The puppy dog trio circled around her. He swallowed the laughter, threatening to burst. Mara handed him one of the shots, keeping another in her hand. "Whatever," she said before downing the tequila and biting into the lime wedge. "That one looks like a tough one. She's not like any of your usual marks." He rolled his eyes and tipped the shot back himself. It burned sliding down, but he kept his face clear as he sunk his teeth into the lime. He said, focusing on the dartboard hanging on the opposite wall. "Do you have a condom?" she asked. His gaze slid to Mara as she inched closer, setting her chin on his shoulder. "Trying to make Vera jealous?" he asked. Her eyes hardened to knives, but she only pushed closer, her chest pressing against his arm. "I've got one," he said, holding her gaze as they pierced him back. "Want to use it or what?"
Brynn. Brynn watched the rowdy group take over the pool tables and darts area. When she'd brought the shots over, asking for all their IDs, she'd discovered some interesting names. Soren, Ender, Mara. Her eyes kept drifting with her gaze falling on the crowd as groups of 2 to 4 of them took up different activities. One couple giggled while throwing darts together after downing 3 shots each. They also exchanged grazing touches when they thought no one was looking. Or maybe they just don't care. Another group, the largest one, loitered around the pool table. They weren't really playing the game. It was more like a bastardized version of it. Mostly the 3 boys stared at the one girl whenever she leaned over. But Brynn's glances kept falling to Finn, sitting in a corner, where one of the girls had joined him. As she wiped down her work area, they both suddenly stood and headed down the hall where the bathrooms were. She sighed. What does it matter? Brynn's attention shifted to the clock on a nearby wall. 11:02 and 3 hours left. She held back a groan as she busied her head with homework problems she'd work on later. Before long, the patrons watching the game started packing up their things and retrieving their credit cards. They were poor tippers, so she bid them adieu. Movement disturbed the shadows by the back hallway. Finn and Mara emerged, looking more put together than most couples she'd seen return from the bathroom together. They rejoined their group, and Brynn noticed that no one else seemed to notice. She shook her head and turned to her counter space behind the bar. "Matheson," she said, without even looking at him. "I'm going to restock from the walk-in." She didn't wait to hear him click his tongue as she left. She just walked to the back room and lost herself in the menial tasks. When she returned, her gaze immediately whipped to the college group at the pool tables, only to find them all collecting their things and readying themselves to leave, most of them staggering as they went. A few of them were even at the bar, probably settling their tabs. "Finn, we'll meet you outside." Her heart flipped like the first drop of a roller coaster. "Yeah," Finn called as he headed for her side of the bar. Once he got there, Matheson leaned over. He mouthed words to Finn she couldn't hear while making her way back. Whatever Matheson said, Finn waved him off. When she noticed the disgruntled expression on the other bartender's face, she fought against her arcing lips. "Hey," Finn said, his forearms on the bar top. "Hi," she said, trying to hide her smile by putting ingredients away. "Did you want to pay now?" "Yeah," he said. "Well, no." Curiosity drove her gaze to him. "Should I charge the card now?" she said, confused by the bemused grin she found. "Or, do you want another drink?" His eyes catching hers, she fidgeted and returned to restocking. "You can charge the card now," he said, his voice a bit deflated. "Okay," she said over a nervous chuckle. She pulled out the card and the notes about the drinks assigned to it, referring to them as she punched in the numbers on the register. "You can have this too," he said as she totaled the amount. Glancing over her shoulder, she watched him slide a small card across the bar top. One of those charming, heartbreaker half smiles lit his face as she reached for it. "You want me to have a business card for a car dealership?" she asked, surveying the name of the high-end dealer she'd seen nearby on her bus rides home. "No," he said, still smirking as he reached for the card. "Flip it over." But he was the one who snuck the card from her hand and turned it, showing her the back where his socials were handwritten in sparkling green ink. "Message me sometime. We could hang out," he said. She said. "Your total's $229.34. "Got it," he said, and she swiped the card. Handing it back to him, their eyes met again. "Talk to you soon." It sounded like a threat as much as a promise.